The prospect of a European Super League is nothing new. Way back in February 1964, writing in World Soccer magazine, legendary football writer Brian Glanville foresaw the formation of a European League in a surprisingly prophetic article carrying the headline, "Economic Reality Will Force European League," in which he stated a Super League was an inevitability. 56 years on, and a European Super League remains a mirage, as Glanville referred to it, but the idea has been floated at various times over the last few decades and has gained momentum recently. So in this video, we're going to try and answer 4 questions. Why is a European Super League being discussed? What might it look like should it come in? And what might the effects be on football in general? And what are our alternatives? So, why have a European Super League? Increasing revenue to the biggest clubs, especially those outside England, is perhaps the most succinct answer. The New York Times reported in December 2019 that Real Madrid president Florentino Perez had been leading discussions for a proposed breakaway league of 2 20-team divisions composed almost exclusively of clubs from Europe's Big Five leagues: England, Spain, France, Germany and Italy. Some clubs have been told that according to projections they could expect to double their revenues by leaving their domestic leagues to join the new league. The concept of promotion and relegation would be retained, but only between the 2 divisions, the report said. Another argument made by some, often also in the interest of increased revenue, is to have the best against the best more often. Although, for another ESL cheerleader, Juventus president Andrea Agnelli, best seems to have become confused with biggest. As Forbes reported in March this year, Agnelli told the FT Business of Football Summit that "I have great respect for everything Atalanta are doing," who are of course surpassing expectations in Serie A this season and previously, "but without international history and thanks to one great season, they had direct access to the primary European competition. Is that right or not?" Then I think of Roma, who contributed in recent years to maintaining Italy's ranking. They had one bad season and they're out, with all the consequent damage to them financially. For me, that's an utterly staggering statement. So basically, Atalanta don't deserve to be in the Champions League instead of Roma, despite being clearly better than Roma for some time and fairly earning their place because Roma have more fans and have won more trophies. This completely ignores the fact that Atalanta have been a credit to both Serie A and the Champions League in recent times, and both competitions are better off for their involvement. One of the many problems here is that those clubs we refer to as the biggest and the best changes all the time. For example, here's Glanville's list from World Soccer in 1964 of his 16-team initial league. Quite a few changes since then. 12 to 15 years ago, would Manchester City or PSG be considered for this league? Probably not. Why should clubs currently referred to as the biggest be allowed to remain the biggest forever? So it's really those like Manchester City and PSG who are the richest, or perhaps more accurately, those with the strongest brands, who will be allowed into this European Super League, which will aid TV rights sales and bring in a bigger worldwide fan base, rather than having any form of meritocratic process based on, football. Otherwise, AC Milan and Marseille, for example, 2 historic clubs with huge fan bases, wouldn't stand a chance as it currently stands. In addition to the New York Times report last year of the 40-team model we've already discussed, in November 2018, Football Leaks and German magazine Der Spiegel released a document supposedly outlining a proposal for a Super League supported by some of Europe's biggest clubs. Real Madrid, AC Milan, Arsenal, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Juventus and Manchester United had allegedly discussed forming a European Super League and leaving their national leagues behind. Bayern Munich was supposed to have even explored the legal complexities of the breakaway. However, Bayern denied this, saying they were unaware of plans for a so-called Super League and had not taken part in negotiations relating to such plans. According to Der Spiegel, there would be 11 founders of the ESL, as it was called, adding PSG, Liverpool, Manchester City and Chelsea, who would also receive guaranteed membership for 20 years with no relegation, plus 5 initial guests: Atletico Madrid, Borussia Dortmund, Inter Milan, Roma and Marseille. It should be said, we actually already have a European Super League. It's called the UEFA Champions League, and in sporting terms, it's been pretty great over the last 3 decades. And that's the key point in this debate. Obviously, everyone wants European competition, but it's the closed nature of these 2 most recent Super League proposals that is a big part of the problem with them. Before considering the wider consequences of a Super League, let's look at the sporting aspect of this debate, across the spectrum from possible adaptations to the Champions League to these breakaway closed Super Leagues. Replacing the 32-team Champions League with a straight league is one idea, although 10 teams or 18 games would likely be its limit. As to win the current Champions League, any club would have to play a minimum of 13 games. So even if you replace the qualifiers earlier in the season, finding room in the calendar for an extra 5 rounds would be tough. Say the league looked like this, with 2 qualifiers from the top 4 leagues currently, plus 2 others. Apart from the fact that you've already lost the likes of Manchester United, Atletico Madrid, Leipzig, Arsenal, Lyon, Inter Milan and Chelsea, who could feasibly win that league in the next 3 years? Maybe half of those 10? So without relegation, while it might be fun for the first half of the season or so, what happens when half the league decides they can't win that league and diverts attention back to domestic competitions? The integrity of the league immediately falls apart. Games suddenly become meaningless for half the league, which also affects those actually chasing the title. Another evolution of the Champions League that has been mentioned by some for a revamp in 2024 is a move away from the 8 groups of 4 teams to 4 groups of 8 teams in the group stages, the top 4 of which will qualify for the round of 16, and less domestic competition to compete with some Champions League games being played at weekends. That would mean convincing national leagues to agreeing to reduce numbers of teams and move away from games at the weekend, which is obviously far more lucrative, which seems unlikely, although if they're threatened with big clubs leaving entirely, perhaps remains possible. Although this means more TV money for Champions League clubs, given that there would be European games, or more European games, while reducing the Premier League dominance in terms of broadcast revenue, a major concern for other clubs outside England as it stands, which would also keep the likes of Perez and Agnelli happy, sportingly this makes little sense either. Big clubs would qualify sooner than they already do from the group stages, and others would go out, effectively, sooner than they do already, meaning more meaningless games before the knockout stages we already have. All we would succeed in doing is diminishing the national leagues. You could add an NFL-style bye system in which the top 2 from each group qualify for a later round of the knockout stages and add Europa League places for the 5th and 6th teams maybe, but whether that's workable, it might keep games alive, but whether it's workable is uncertain. The 16-team closed breakaway example reported by Der Spiegel is perhaps the worst of the lot, as without relegation, 10 of those teams wouldn't stand a chance of winning this league anytime soon. And as there's nothing else to play for, assuming they aren't taking part in domestic cups either, surely they would drift into apathy around January time, which not only means meaningless games in some kind of weird perpetual mid-table, but as with the 10-team version, the integrity of the league would suffer, because playing a motivated Borussia Dortmund on day 1 of the season versus playing a Dortmund resigned to mid-table obscurity in March time are 2 very different proposals. And the fixture schedule would have a large effect on the chances of those teams actually competing for the title. This is something alongside clubs resting players for Champions League games, national leagues already struggle with, of course, but the effect would be amplified significantly here. The project, supposedly led by Florentino Perez, reported by the New York Times in December last year, would, in theory, maybe relatively fun for the first half of the season, be a decent sporting spectacle, in the first division at least, given that there is promotion and relegation. But the mid-table effect would again be amplified by the fact that there's no real reward in finishing anywhere other than not in the relegation spots or first, with no top 4 Champions League to play for, Europa League spots, etc. Unless you introduce an end-of-season playoff system to see who won the title, but that would make the regular season, which would be pretty long with 20 teams, pretty pointless. And the very best teams to qualify early on, meaning more meaningless games. The second division would be close to utterly pointless and is seemingly only there to give the top tier some relegation to avoid. With a second division of 20 teams closed at the bottom, the majority of the games would quickly become pretty pointless. Mid-table mediocrity for many teams was set in around Christmas time, if not sooner, even if you introduced a playoff system. For what it's worth, Glanville's piece in World Soccer back in 1964, seemingly influenced by the English league structure at the time, suggested expanding his European Super League to 4 divisions over a period of time with promotion and relegation between them, and allowing teams from outside the structure to apply for entry at the bottom of Division 4, while keeping all teams competing in those leagues in their domestic cup competitions. Although still unpalatable, the intervening 56 years haven't produced a better idea. So if it does happen, what might the effects be? Aside from the fact that all these versions of a possible league would be detrimental to the sporting product as it stands, a massive problem with the closed league proposals, such as the idea reported by Der Spiegel and this Florentino Perez supposedly led project, would be catastrophic for the rest of football in general. For example, if the 6 most prominent clubs were to leave the Premier League, broadcast revenue, sponsorship and advertising money for the rest of the teams would disappear almost overnight. Without the increased exposure and interest those clubs provide, the league becomes a far less attractive proposition for investors, advertisers and TV companies. Would the remaining clubs be able to survive that cliff edge? I don't know. There would also be a knock-on effect to the rest of the lower divisions without the same parachute payments, transfer fees and so on. The same would be the case for the other national leagues affected by the Super League. Although theoretically you might see a backlash against the idea, with less entrenched football fans diverting their attention to the remaining Premier League clubs and the lower divisions, maybe fans of those clubs who left would start their own clubs like AFC Wimbledon and FC United of Manchester to fill the gaps. You might even see a more exciting and even league, but without the same resources, would the standards remain as high? It's very unlikely. Meanwhile, every achievement left for the clubs in the league that remains would have a big asterisk. So if, say, Newcastle won whatever was left of the Premier League, it might not carry the same impact without the 6 most prominent clubs in the country competing in the same division. Unsurprisingly, condemnation of a Super League has been widespread. Kevin Miles, chief executive of the Football Supporters Association in England, said, "These proposals are totally counter to the principles of sporting achievement, and the knock-on effects would be disastrous throughout the game. The plans could force lower league clubs to the edge of the abyss, destroy domestic cup competitions and pull up the drawbridge on teams with no European pedigree. It doesn't matter how big or small your club is, these proposals would be massively damaging throughout the football pyramid. We'll do everything in our powers to oppose them." Meanwhile, Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp told Kicker last year, "I hope this Super League will never happen." And Spanish sports daily AS reported Manchester City manager Pep Guardiola told Catalan newspaper Ara that "I do not much agree with the idea. Someone should explain to me why it's a good idea. If it happens, we'll kill the leagues. If Barca and Real Madrid go and they don't play against Espanyol anymore, who will follow the league? The Spanish league will die." Quoted by the New York Times last year, although he obviously has a vested interest in there not being a Super League, UEFA President Alexander Ceferin summed it up, saying, "I have read about this insane plan. It would be hard to think of a more selfish and egotistical scheme. It would clearly ruin football around the world for the players, for the fans, and for everyone connected with the game, all for the benefit of a tiny number of people." However, not everyone is wholly against the idea. PSG coach Thomas Tuchel, for example, said in 2016, while Borussia Dortmund manager, that "I am very happy about the idea of a Euro League. In my opinion, it's legitimate for bosses to think about new competitions and alternatives. It's important to keep the sport as attractive as possible." So, what alternatives are there? While I categorically disagree with Tuchel about the Super League itself, I do agree with him that football needs to keep evolving. Agnelli, meanwhile, told the leaders in Sport Business Summit last year that football is at risk of losing young people to games like Fortnite and League of Legends, and surprisingly, I agree with him there too. Sport needs fans more than it needs money, but a closed European league would alienate the majority of genuine football fans around the continent, and there's no guarantee it would bring in a new audience. Certainly not to replace the one it's lost. A far, far better way to do this would be to make existing competitions more exciting, more even, and attractive to a new and established fan. That might mean each national league sharing TV money, advertising and sponsorship evenly among the clubs, introducing some form of budget or wage cap, or even limiting transfer spending, making ticket prices far more affordable, especially in England, to get young people into games again, reducing limits on squad sizes and restricting loans to even out the quality of players among the clubs, adding more promotion, more relegation, more playoff systems for European places to make as many games as meaningful as possible. Domestic leagues as well as UEFA should standardise those rules across the leagues to make them as fair and even as possible for every team. Maybe there is a discussion to be had about expanding an open, meritocratic and democratic Champions League to mitigate the financial dominance of the Premier League, but revenue there should be shared among the clubs evenly too. Investing in those ideas would allow football to maintain its essence, keep its long-term supporters and attract new fans by making the sport itself more even, more exciting and more accessible both for TV viewers and match-going fans. Unfortunately, however, that benefits 99.9% of people who have a vested interest in football, mainly the fans and the viewers, and rewards well-run clubs, both sportingly and financially, like Atalanta, Leicester and Getafe, not the historic but horribly mismanaged teams like AC Milan or the greed of a handful of clubs and their presidents like Andrea Agnelli and Florentino Perez.